Today I want to talk about a memorial to our ancestors. And our scripture is from the book of Hebrews. We are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. And we come to Memorial Day weekend that has somehow or another become the unofficial beginning of summer. Memorial Day is celebrated as a day in which we are encouraged to remember all those soldiers who died in battle serving America. But for most people, it's just a day off work or a day off school, where there may be some sales at the mall and a Law and Order marathon scheduled on TV. But it's a little known fact of history that Memorial Day began as Decoration Day. On May 1st, 1865, in Charleston, South Carolina, newly freed slaves organized a ceremony to memorialize the Union soldiers that had died at a local prisoner of war camp there in Charleston. And the hundreds of soldiers that died during the war were hastily and disrespectfully thrown in graves, unmarked graves. And the area where they were buried in was overgrown and unkept. So on that day, basically organized by the newly established black churches, on that day, 10,000 newly freed black people gathered, and they cleaned up the area and landscaped the grounds. They built an enclosure and an arch that honored the fallen soldiers as martyrs of freedom. They bought flowers to be laid on the burial field, and the historian David W. Blight described the day. He said, "This was the first Memorial Day. African Americans invented Memorial Day in Charleston, South Carolina. What you have here is black Americans recently freed from slavery, announcing to the world with their flowers, their feet, and their songs what the war had been about. What they were creating was the Independence Day of a second American Revolution." So, you know, when you're looking at the History Channel and they celebrating Vietnam and everything, you got to remember that's not how the day started. The day started because black people were remembering people who had lost their lives in the fight against slavery. This day was probably the first time in American history that black people had something to remember and celebrate as a people. I keep harping on this, that we don't have anything that we really celebrate as a people. We have holidays, but there are other people's holidays that we have adopted. We don't have anything that we celebrate really as a people. Next month, Juneteenth, is going to come along on June 19th, and it's going to be a day like any other day. Nothing special going on. We still have no celebrations as a people where we collectively remember and celebrate past memorials. So what I want to do today is encourage us to remember our forgotten ancestors. We really can't go back that far. Maybe a generation, maybe two, if you're lucky, three. But after that, it all gets fuzzy. It all gets lost. But somebody had to be living then for us to be living now. Somebody had to be wading through difficulty then for us to have a chance now. I want to remember our forgotten ancestors who endured 20 generations of hell to keep us alive and to make our present opportunities possible. Now, in the traditional African worldview, memory was all important. We always had memorials. Every day was a memorial because everything was built around the past. The worldview was based on the past. In their view, the things we're doing today grow out of the past, which has led us to this place. And so we really are an extension of other people's lives that came before us. Everything was connected to the past, and we're simply carrying out a process that was initiated by people that were here before we came along. They believed that there was really only one life force, and that life force, or vital energy, was God. And God was, in their words, the supreme force. The supreme force. Everything that's moving got some of the supreme force. But they also believed that this vital energy could not be created or destroyed. It was reincarnated into new incarnations. In other words, God created us, and we are simply handing down the same life force energy from person to person, descendant to descendant, generation after generation. The life force that's in me and in you was in one of our ancestors before, and it is now reincarnated in our bodies. And when our mortal bodies fall apart, then that life force is going to go into somebody else. And this is where the idea of naming children the names of dead ancestors came from. They believed that newborn babies were the reincarnation of dearly departed ancestors. And so they recycled names based on who the baby reminded them of. Oh, that's Uncle Charles. His name is Charles. They would just give you the name because you were, in fact, the reincarnation of your uncle. It was the same life force being handed forward. This meant that we are our ancestors. You got to think about that for a minute. Not that you got some ancestors and they had their time and now you got yours. This meant that I am my ancestors. And they are living through me. And that whatever hopes and dreams and aspirations that they hope to have in their time are being lived out through what I do in my time. They believe that their lives and circumstances had not only been shaped by their ancestors, but that their ancestors were still participating in their daily lives. This is so foreign that you got to sit there and think about this for a minute. That your ancestors are actually living through you and participating in your daily life. When you happy, they're happy. When you have a success, they have a success. They believe that they participated in their daily lives, guiding them, warning them, helping them, chastising them when they messed up. The ancestors cried with us in our failures and celebrated with us in our victories. And that's why the ancestors had a chair at every table. Every time they sat down to eat, there was a chair, and all the ancestors had that was in that one chair. There was always a chair at the table for the ancestors. There was a plate at every meal, a room in every house. The ancestors danced at every party and were consulted for every major decision. You didn't go off and get married without consulting the ancestors. Is this all right? You know something about this man's people that we don't know? They had to consult the ancestors for every major decision. In African understanding, family and community consisted not just of the living, but also by a great invisible fellowship of ancestors or a great cloud of witnesses. Now, from this worldview where everything was connected and based on the past and a sense of generational memory, what we got immersed in slavery was the exact opposite. The continuity with the past was gone. Slavery immersed black people into a world where we were stripped of memory and disconnected from any kind of generational continuity. So, you go in, I was watching 60 Minutes last week, and this winemaker in Italy could go back to when his company was founded, and he could go back 40, 50 generations. And they were all up on, all the people on the wall. And you go into an English aristocrat's house, and they got all their ancestors along the wall. I remember when I was at Yale. Yale was founded in 1601. So it existed almost 200 years before the United States was a country. And when you walk through the halls, you got all these big portraits of white men staring down on you. They didn't start admitting women at Yale until 1969. And you got these generations of white men in every hall you go down everywhere, and they staring down on you. And you get a sense of the continuity of generations, how the institution has deep roots. But we don't have any of that. We don't have any sense of generational continuity. We know mama, may know daddy, may know grandmama, may know granddaddy, but after that, it gets fuzzy. Slavery was the beginning of stripping us of this sense of continuity. It stripped the African of every shred of memory and ancestry as a part of a process called animalization, or reducing human beings to animal consciousness, to thinking like an animal, to having the life expectancy of an animal, to having the outlook and worldview of an animal. That means you got to destroy meaning, you got to destroy history, you got to destroy culture, language, you got to destroy everything that makes people human and strip them of it so that you can turn them into a horse. See, if the few, with each passing generation being further removed from Africa, black people were born, lived and died with no real knowledge of those that had come before. What did it all mean? Who were we? What is our name? Where are we from? You from the barn. You aren't from anywhere. We made you. You were bred for a specific purpose. And so people had no sense of connection to anything other than the work I'm doing today. Black people's history was intentionally erased. Our oppressors wanted to make it seem as if black people had no past, so that our enslavement, our animalization, and exploitation would be justified. And not only were we separated from any sense of our ancestors, but we were regularly even separated from our existing family. I mean, our brothers and our sisters. PBS, in a special on slavery, said, economic benefit always outweighed consideration of family ties for slave owners. This was strictly business. Because of the high premium placed on male labor throughout every period of American slavery, black men were the most likely to be parted from their families. For slave owners who considered the basic family unit to be comprised of mother and child, husbands and fathers could be easily replaced. Many a slave woman was assigned a new husband by her master. So it gets kind of difficult to have a sense of generational continuity when things are always breaking up. In another book, The Half That Has Never Been Told by Edward Baptist, he says, some who were separated from their parents as children first forgot their parents' faces and then even their names. Whenever they saw an adult who resembled their fuzzy memories, they asked, "Are you my mother? Are you my father?" Family separation destroyed generational continuity and created a mentality of isolation where slaves were rootless and dangling, undirected by the past and feeling no obligation to the future. They learned to care about no one but themselves. The pain of separation made us conclude that belonging was a weakness. That it was a weakness to belong. And we still feel that way. I don't want to get tied up with Negroes. I don't want to have to go through the trouble of getting along with them. I don't want to have to go through disagreements and I don't want to go through all that. But the opposite side is you alone in the world by yourself. Not connected to anything. People say, I'm tired of my family. I don't even want to deal with them. We came to conclude that belonging was a weakness, a disadvantage. And the erasure of kinship bonds and living a life with no knowledge of ancestry, stripped life of meaning and purpose has made us easier to control. When you belong and are connected, you'll die for other people. But when you're alone and totally immersed, it's all about you. You're not going to give yourself to anything. And that makes us easier to control because you only got the whole system controlling one person. That's pretty easy. As a result of 250 years of slavery and 100 years of Jim Crow, black people were not only stripped of their past, but also consciously decided to forget. We consciously decided to forget. So we come from Africa where everything is about the past and the ancestors to a place where we're stripped of generational continuity to the point where we don't want to remember. We don't want to transfer bad memories to our children. And so black people consciously decided not to tell the nightmarish stories of our American experience to succeeding generations of children because we feared that it would poison their hearts and sabotage their journey toward the American dream. But that decision also contributed to the destruction of our collective memory. Without a memory, our sense of identity and connection to the past generations was weakened. We forgot our ancestors. Everybody else has the benefit, the comfort, the security of knowing that I'm from a place, from a people. I spoke a language. I did things in history. I'm a part of this. And we have to operate in a world where that's not true. Maya Angelou said, because we have forgotten our ancestors, our children no longer give us honor. Because we have lost the path our ancestors cleared, our children cannot find their way. Because we abandon the path of our ancestors, our children cannot pray. We uniquely among all the peoples of the earth don't feel that we belong to anything bigger and more important than we are. Our children grow up as individualistic narcissists. Individualistic narcissists. It's all about me. It's all about me. You had your time. You messed up your life. I'm not going to let you mess up mine. It's about me. They have no real knowledge or appreciation of the people that came before them. They don't have any sense of indebtedness. Here's a young man talking in the culture center not long ago. He was talking about we young people are really not motivated by hearing all this stuff about everything people before them went through. And I said, well, ain't that a damn shame? How you going to sit here sane, clothed, and talk about you weren't motivated by things that came before you? It make you kind of want to get violent. Sometimes you got to be beat into you. I mean, it was such an absurd statement. But to make it while you standing in the culture center made it all the more ridiculous. How could you say that? This whole thing is dedicated to all of us. It's everything you look at is about all of us. How could you sit there and be so obtuse as to not recognize that this has to do with the connectivity of a people? I I don't feel anything about it. It doesn't mean anything to me. Well, because we have people that feel like this is why we are uniquely handicapped at acting intelligently toward our group interests. I mean, we just don't have anything. Here it is, 2016. We handle $1.5 trillion every year. Enough money to make us the 10th largest economy in the world. Right under Canada, right above Russia. We make more money than Russia. We always talk about we're poor, but we're really not poor. We're poor in comparison to white people. But we're not poor. In the world, we're not poor. We got money passing through our hands, but that's all it's doing. It's passing through our hands. $1.5 trillion is enough money to have a significant power in the world. But it's our mentality will not let us use it in any kind of intelligent way. So the reason why white folks are the richest people in the world, because they got theirs and ours too. Give it right back to them. This woman in Chicago wrote a book called Our Black Year, where she's talking about her family's efforts to try to buy black for a year, to buy from nobody but black people. And it was a terrible ordeal because she couldn't get it. Most of the things she needed, she couldn't get. Why is it that we uniquely don't put those things in together? Why is it we have unemployment? Because if you don't employ your own people, you're going to have unemployment. It's not magic. The reason that Mexicans work more than we do, they got more businesses than we do. If the government employs more black people than anybody in the world, in this country, next to that, black businesses are the second largest employer of black people. But black businesses are only 2% of business. And that's why we got massive unemployment. All this is a part of a mentality that has to do with the stripping of generational continuity and a deciding to forget, consciously deciding not to transfer our knowledge about our people to young people because it was going to leave a bad taste in their mouth, make them angry. Throughout the history of America, black people have been the victims of a system of total exploitation. Black people in America have never been treated as people. From the very beginning, black people have been regarded as raw material, a natural resource like coal or oil or natural gas or trees. We were a resource to be plundered and raped and exploited to yield the greatest benefit to white society. Slaves in 1860, America were the number one resource in the country, worth more than $3 billion, more than all the factories, all the railroads, all the banks, all the agriculture, more than all the worth of the rest of the total American economy combined. Slaves were worth more than every single thing else in the country. Harper's Magazine estimates that the United States stole between 1619 and 1865, 22,505,049 hours of forced labor from black people. 22 million hours stolen from black people. And then they calculated it up and said that that labor was worth over $100 trillion. The annual budget of the United States today, with wars and surveillance and welfare and everything else that they do, is $13 trillion. What I'm saying is $100 trillion is more money than the United States has had in its treasury since it's been a country. I want you to let that sink in. When people start talking about reparations and stuff. There's more money was stolen from black people during slavery. Not after slavery. We got a whole nother ledger over there for that. But during slavery, 1619 to 1865 was worth over $100 trillion. And that's more money than the United States has had in its treasury since it's been a country. Records indicate that $350 billion were made selling slaves. That provided the wealth that undergirded not just the whole American economy, but also all the economies of Europe. It funded the Industrial Revolution, the banking and insurance companies, funded the American National Treasury. It built the roads and bridges and dams and railroads and canals and telegraph lines and universities. It provided the capital for corporations to borrow and build industry. The South was the richest and most politically powerful region of the country. Charleston, South Carolina was the biggest American city because it was the biggest slave port. The Mississippi Delta was the Silicon Valley of the day, with more millionaires than any place in the country due to the Delta's cotton plantations. Now they call them cotton plantations, but that's not what they were. I mean, we get this picture of an idyllic little extended family with black folks in the back in slavery. But they weren't cotton plantations. They were slave labor camps. Cotton made the American South the Saudi Arabia of the 1800s, since cotton was the most profitable commodity in the history of the world up until that time. Plantations were actually slave labor camps for the production of cotton, and black people were the equipment. We're still talking about our ancestors. Edward Baptiste says, to pick cotton quickly enough to avoid the 100 lashes penalty, one had to disembody oneself. Picking all day long until late at night, even by candlelight, they had to disassociate their minds from pain that racked their stooping backs, from blood running down their pricked fingertips, from hands that gnarled into claws over a few short years, from thirst, hunger, blurred vision, and anxiety about the whippings behind them and before them. One had to separate mind from hand to become, for a time, little more than a hand. Many of the people who came out of chains and off the blocks, who couldn't make their weight in those first few weeks in the cotton field, were beaten so badly at the end of the day that they lost everything. Their words, their selves, even their names. You don't pick your weight, you're going to get beat 100 times across your back. And that's going to happen every day. You don't pick your weight. So while you're still bleeding from yesterday's beating, because you done just walked across the country, that when slaves got into the ports on the East Coast, how you think they got to Mississippi? They walked. 2 by 2, chained together, they walked. And when you got there, and if you first got off the blocks and got out there and started picking and didn't know what you were doing, for every day that you don't make your weight, your back get beat open. And while your back is bleeding from yesterday, it's time for another 100 lashes today. And so people lost their minds behind the torture that was being instilled. I'm still talking about our ancestors. They actually lost their minds behind the pressure that they were dealing with. He goes on to say, the threat of torture drove the enslaved to become picking machines. Torture walked right behind them all day, every day. Every cotton labor camp used torture as its central technology to force people to focus their minds on inventing new ways to perform repetitive, mind-numbing labor at nearly impossible speed. We don't owe our ancestors nothing. After the Civil War, rather than destroying slavery, they simply reorganized it so the total exploitation of black people was still possible. A new system was created. Black people were no longer owned and controlled by a master, but owned and controlled by a society. The Jim Crow system was, in fact, a second slavery. There's a book called Slavery by Any Other Name that describes the new system they put together. My father made me understand all the time. He made me understand that you are one generation removed from a slave. And I said, well, you know, it wasn't no slavery. He said, I wasn't born in slavery, but I was a slave. By the 1920s, the Jim Crow system had 5 times more black people enslaved than there were before the Civil War, and was exponentially more profitable. A system of state-sponsored terrorism was created to keep black people in place no matter what the law said. In World War I, black men served with distinction, believing it was going to make a difference in conditions at home. And the French awarded one all-black division more medals than any American division ever won in American military history. But it didn't stop them from being lynched with their uniforms on when they returned home. The whites told the American generals didn't want to command black troops, but they gave the troops away to the French, so you can have them. The French didn't have no bias. They were fighting for the survival of their homeland. So they let the brothers go out there and do their thing. And the Germans would see some brothers coming and would break out running. We're not fighting them. They got more battle decorations than any division in the history of American military history. But it wasn't nothing made of it back here. And it didn't keep them from lynching them once they got back. I'm still talking about our ancestors. In 1935, when Social Security was established to provide insurance against poverty for people in old age, it was put together, it was designed so that 80% of black people were ineligible to receive it. Farm workers couldn't receive it. Domestics were ineligible. This was the Southern politicians' way of making sure that none of the government money was funneled to black people. When the GI Bill was passed after World War II and made it possible for soldiers to buy a home, black veterans didn't qualify for mortgages because the homes in the areas into which they were segregated didn't meet the bank's requirements of sound investments. So they couldn't get a loan to buy a black home. And they couldn't move to the houses where they would loan them money. Then in the 1960s, when black people suddenly discovered black was beautiful and came together to fight for black group self-determination, the FBI and every law enforcement agency in the country enacted a coordinated program to jail, discredit, pacify, or assassinate every leadership figure in the black community. Then, for good measure, they flooded the black community with drugs to destroy our unity and our liberation ambitions. The history of black people in America is the story of being treated as a natural resource to be exploited for the benefit of white society. All of the wealth in America comes from the total exploitation of black people. What I'm trying to say on this Memorial Day is that our ancestors went through absolute hell living in a state of state-sanctioned program of terrorism and total exploitation. And they went through it for 20 generations. For 20 generations. We can't go back but 2 or 3 generations. And even the people we know caught hell. But the further you go back, the greater the hell was. And we don't remember. And Memorial Day comes around and we don't even know what to memorialize. Why is it important? It's important because you're sitting here. After all we've been through, we're here. Well dressed, well fed, smelling good, and almost sane. We need to know that we've endured 400 years designed to take everything from us and leave us dead. But here we are. Here we are alive and well and keeping on. Here we are celebrating graduations and birthdays and engagements and anniversaries. Here we are, with our stomachs full and our nice clothes, with our educations, and generally well off. Here we are with big dreams and high aspirations. Here we are with a president that looks like us. And at this year's Howard commencement address, President Obama said, if you had to choose one moment in history in which you could be born, you wouldn't choose 100 years ago. You wouldn't choose the 50s or the 60s or the 70s. You'd choose right now. If you had to choose a time to be, in the words of Lorraine Hansberry, young, gifted, and black in America, you would choose now. I tell you all this because it's important to know. Important to note progress. Because to deny how far we've come would do a disservice to the cause of justice, to the legions of foot soldiers, to not only have incredibly accomplished individuals who have already been mentioned, but your mothers and dads and grandparents and great-grandparents. Who marched and toiled and suffered and overcame to make this day possible. I tell you this not to lull you into complacency, but to spur you into action, because there's still so much work to do, so many more miles to travel. We need to understand what we need to be memorializing on this weekend. We need to understand that the generations are connected in ways that are far more profound than we previously understood. Preachers like to talk about generational curses, but in best self-theology, I think it's much more important to understand and focus on generational blessings, the things that we can actually hand down to those that's going to come after us, the good things that we can build up in our own character that we hand down to the people coming after us. Whatever blessings and benefits and advantages we may have had in our lives, they don't come to us simply by our own efforts. They were passed down to us. Now you can think, look, I wasn't born with anything. I didn't inherit anything. My people didn't have anything. I worked hard to get where I am. So where do you think you got the determination, the grit, and the optimism to keep working to make something of yourself? Your ancestors developed that fighting through all kind of hardship for generations. See, they didn't have the opportunity that you had to actually make these qualities work for you, to make dramatic improvements in their lives. But they made dramatic improvements internally in their character. And those things got handed down to you. They used their inherited strengths to stay alive and not lose their minds, so they could be handed down to you. Our lives are built on the past. They're built on past lives. Everything our people went through and how they dealt with it has served to put us further down the road. And it should be our goal to put those coming after us even further down the road on a totally new level. What I'm trying to say is we're sowing seeds. Why should I be my best self? Because you're sowing seeds for future generations. Whether you realize it or not, everything you do counts. There's nothing done in secret for which there are not consequences to our posterity. Every time you persevere, every time you overcome, every time you get by, get up and try again and again, every time you show solidarity or exhibit compassion or stand up for what's right and offer service to those in need, you are storing up equity in your generational account. And conversely, if you cause trouble all the time, If you build up addictions and compulsions and bad habits, you're going to hand those down too. Everything we do counts, and we hand it down. It's easy to think I'm not a great leader or anything. I'm just a city employee. I'm just a grandmother. I'm just trying to run my little business, or I'm just a housewife, or I'm just a single mom trying to raise my kids and going to work. I'm not going to do anything great. You've got to learn to think more generationally like our African ancestors. The fact that you are a good parent, a principled person, faithful to your spouse, loyal to your family and friends, doing your part to improve your community and working to be your best self, you are sowing seeds for those that have come after you. And you may not see it all happen in your lifetime. You may be sowing a seed for a child or a grandchild or a great-grandchild that hasn't even been born yet. But you're establishing the stepping stones which is going to allow them to keep their appointment with destiny and do something great. You are building a family and group legacy. It's not just your life you are affecting. You are handing down good things. Doing your best every day matters. You are literally changing your family tree, changing our people, and changing the world. You can't say, well, you know, my family's had some bad luck. Well, you're supposed to be part of the process of changing the luck. So breaking the cycle and moving in another direction. Our church is built on the acknowledgement of the fact that we share a sacred trust with those who have gone before and those who will come after. What I'm trying to say is our future will grow out of our sense of connection to our ancestors in the past, our connection to each other in the present, and our descendants in the future. We are in this thing together. We can't give up. We have to run through the tape. This is a relay that spans many generations. We can't die with the baton in our hand. We have to pass it on in better position than we received it. This is our sacred duty. This is our blood-bought obligation. We have not endured this ordeal for no reason. What has not killed us has made us stronger. We've been strengthened for some purpose, some critical role in God's plan. We are destined to be restored to our original place of power and dignity in the world. After all we've been through, here we are. Memorial Day ought to mean much more to us than a day off work, a day out of school, barbecue and watermelon. We ought to be memorializing our ancestors. Our ancestors are the most unappreciated people in the history of the world. We owe it to ourselves and to those that made a way for us to remember them and thank them, even though we can't remember their faces. Let us celebrate our ancestors, for they have given us all that we have. Amen.